Assalamu alaikum. It is an honor and a pleasure to be with you, and it is an honor and pleasure to speak on this wonderful topic. I want to thank all of you who are in attendance and to thank all of the organizers of this MAS-ICNA Convention. I want to quickly remind us, because as we're sitting here and we're going through talk after talk, it's easy to forget our intention. And we know that we're here, yes, to listen about how we can become better Muslims, but we also want to jam-pack this moment with as much barakah, with as many intentions and worship and gifts to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as we possibly can, so that we leave this gathering with the fullness of the moment and with the maximum benefit. So to remind us, we're here by the intention to expose our souls to the mercy of Allah. We're here by the intention to expose our minds and our hearts to the transformation of Allah. We're here by the intention that we can be firm upon Sirat al-Mustaqim, that we can hear from our teachers and our scholars and our activists about how we can move forward according to the sunnah of the beloved messenger alayhi salatu wasalam. We're here by the intention to follow the commandments in the Quran, to enjoin the good and to forbid the evil, to walk away from every darkness and every ignorance and walk toward light and to walk toward wisdom. We're here by the intention to embody the Quran and to embody the sunnah of our beloved messenger alayhi salatu wasalam, and moving forward in all that is good and what is right and what is justice. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make this moment a means by which He numbers us and our entire lineage to be among the salihin. Allahumma ameen. I want to thank my brother Anthony, because without a doubt, one thing about the African American community, that we are not short on people who fight for justice, and we are not short on some of the best orators to give it to us. Fannie Lou Hamer, a leader in the civil rights movement, said, "You can pray until you faint, but if you don't get up and try to do something, God is not going to put it in your lap." Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reminds us of this as we hear so ever often. Inna Allah la yughayru ma yuqawmun hatta yughayru ma bi anfusihim. That Allah will never change the condition of a people until they change that which is within themselves. I actually want to start off where my brother left. I want to start where my brother left off, when he talked about the greatest weapon of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressor. That which he uses against us, the oppressed, is the mind of the oppressor. I want to talk about that, because in order for us to be able to address all of the things that in matters of civil rights, in order for us to address the topic about the dreams of African Americans and other minorities, in order for us to address the relationship the Muslims of America have with the African American community, we must first courageously and be willing to address the oppression and lack of civil rights and human rights internally. See, one of the things about us having the mind of the oppressor, it becomes so ever present when we begin to look at our communities. It becomes ever so present when I can walk into any khutbah. And yes, it is important, definitely, especially now, to talk about the situation in Palestine, to talk about the Rohingya Muslims, to talk about what is happening in Iraq or in Iran, in Afghanistan. It is important. But if I cannot walk into any masjid and they are not talking about the mass incarceration, they are not talking about the school to prison pipeline, if they are not talking about police brutality, if they are not talking about the suffrage of African Americans and our black youth, then we have a problem from within. And so recognizing, what does this stem from? This is where we have to look deeply within. Where does this stem from that we feel like that any time someone says we've got to address Black Lives Matter, we've got to address these issues, we're told no, this is too political. As if Syria wasn't political, as if Palestine wasn't political, as if Iraq wasn't political, Afghanistan or Rohingya wasn't political. See, the problem is that we're more than a century into the fight of civil rights. And this work has still been unfinished. It's incomplete. Why is it incomplete? Because we have yet to check that which is within ourselves. If it's not as if oppression or immigration or black suffrage is a new problem, we must become a new people. We must fall out of love, and I'm going to use this term that I borrow from Dr. Sherman Jackson when he spoke at Howard University. We must fall out of love with the fascinating trickster, and that I'm talking about white supremacy. We must resort back to the sunnah of our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because it is from our love of this dunya, it is from our love of status that we are too fearful to stand up. We are afraid to identify with the marginalized people out of fear that I may be targeted. We are afraid to stand up and be on the front lines because maybe I might lose my job, or I might lose my status, or I might lose my wealth. If that is the case, if we have that kind of cowardice, and we've got to check our hearts, if we have that kind of cowardice, then we cannot stand on the shoulders of the civil rights leaders of that, not of Martin Luther King, not of Muhammad Ali, and definitely not of Al-Hajj Malik El-Shabazz, Allah yarhamuhu. Because these were people who were willing to suffer prison. They were willing to suffer their status. They were willing to suffer their lives in order to stand up, not just for their rights, but for the rights of all of us. I want to think just a minute. I want to go back to the story of Muhammad Ali, Allah yarhamuhu. And in the story of Muhammad Ali, I was recently talking to a friend of mine, and it's interesting about his stance about the Vietnam War. See, what happened was that a few years before he was drafted, he actually enlisted in the war. And he was told that he wasn't intelligent enough to actually be a soldier. And so it wasn't until he became a Muslim, a well-known Muslim, a famous Muslim, it wasn't until he became the heavyweight champion of the world known as Muhammad Ali that they then began to say, we're going to draft you into the war. And at that time, there were many draft dodgers. There were many people who were crossing over into Canada in order to avoid being drafted. But Muhammad Ali actually said, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to run and hide. I'm not going to change my entire life. I'm going to stand up for what is right. And so he said, I'm going to take this stance, not just for me, but for all of my Muslim brothers and sisters and others who are drafted to fight wars that are not befitting of them. And so what did he suffer? He lost his title. For 3 years, he lost his livelihood because he wasn't able to box. And of course, they drug his name through the mud. But in the end, Muhammad Ali came out victorious, not just as the heavyweight champion of the world, but a champion of the people. When he passed away, he caused the heads of nations to bow their heads and to bear witness and to listen to the Quran. And the meaning behind this is why قَدْ أَفْلَحَ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ, because the believers must win. I have a short time, and I want to just quickly remind us because it's important. They've asked me to say, well, what did African American Muslims contribute to the dream? What did they contribute to beyond Muhammad Ali and Malcolm X? These are just names. What did they really contribute? Well, let's look at it. Number one, based on any fight and struggle that they maintained, that they stood for religious rights and religious freedom. And so even now, the Religious Rights and Freedom Act that came as a result of that was from their struggle. African Americans actually made it possible for us when we could begin to change our names. They were the first who took it to court and say that because of my religious rights, you have to acknowledge my ability to go to Jummah. You have to acknowledge my right to take off from work or to pull my child out of school for aid. And so now we're still in this struggle. Many states have won that victory, but we have a legal precedence to stand on because they first did that. Also, equal employment opportunities, where you could not be discriminated against based on ethnicity, religion, national origin, gender, or sexual orientation, for which I, as a Muslim woman, can work and wear hijab. This was from the fight of African American Muslims. Even something closer to home as a mother, that it was actually African American Muslims who said, I will not allow my enemy to educate my children. So they pulled them out of school and they began to homeschool them. And this began the rights of women to homeschool their children and to be accepted into college. Also, in addition, in 1965, the Equal Citizenship and Immigration laws were passed. Because of the documentation of El-Hajj Malik Shabazz and his travels, because of the work of religious rights, this actually changed in 1965 immigration from being mostly immigration of white men and immigration of white families to all of our other Muslim brothers and sisters from Somalia, from Sudan, from Saudi Arabia, and from Egypt, and from all the Muslim countries, that we can now sit, even our Pakistani community, that we can now sit together as one brotherhood and be in this conference together. Even the fact that we can be inside of this convention center, inside of this hotel, is because of the fight of African American Muslims and African Americans in general for the civil rights movement. So I want us, and I have a short time, Allah help, I want us to be wary of two things that actually plagued the civil rights movement. And that was of being accommodationist and being those who assimilate. It's very important that in order for us to push this agenda forward, that we don't become people who say, I am satisfied to just sit beside my enemy. I am satisfied to just sit at the same table as the one who oppresses me. Or that I'm satisfied as long as my family can attend the same schools. This will not work. Being accommodationist and being those who assimilate must not work. Why? Because you as Muslims were called to stand up. You were called to rise. You were called to be identified as the best of people and the best of nations. Therefore, you cannot be the same. You must be better. I want to quote these couple of things in the dream of King. And I see the one telling me my time is up, and I'll be quick. The dream of King, we all reduce his speech that we won't be satisfied basically until white men and white women and black children can sit beside each other. But his dream was bigger than this, and these are a few excerpts from his speech. As he was speaking truth to power, blacks have been alienated, crippled by the chains of discrimination and exile in their own lands. That blacks and whites all must be granted unalienable rights to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. America has defaulted on this promise. Fierce urgency of now. This is not the time to engage in luxury and cooling off and the tranquilizing drug of gradualization. Now is the time to rise from the dark dark and desolate valley to the sunlit path of justice. If we're going to do this, we must be active in the fight against mass incarceration, against private prisons. We must be active in criminal justice. It must not be okay that we know when Palestinians and Egyptians and Rohingyans are in genocide, we must not have a blind love to America that we don't call out the murder rates of African American men and women. We must make our Islamic schools shape them differently by giving them a better education of history. And that history must include the history of African Americans and their contribution to America. It's easy to stand on dead leaders, but how will we follow the likes of our activists now, Imam Zaid, Linda Sarsour, Marjorie Aziza Hill, Mark Crane, Camilla Rashad, Ahmed Abu Zaid, Jamara Amani, and Dawood Walid of CARE? We must stand with these and their organizations, Dream Defenders, Muslim Ark, and CARE, in order to further this. My dream is that black youth and struggles are mentioned in the khutbah. Sheikh Uthman Danfodio is mentioned as much as Imam Ghazali. Our leaders are well taken care of, that we have iftars with barbecue chicken, yams, mac and cheese, and greens. Muslim women on the front lines are on marches, and that all of our struggle is acknowledged so that we can succeed together, and that we can be the community who enjoins the good and who enjoins the good and forbid the evil, so that we can truly be the best of nations. Jazakumullahu khairan. Thank you so much for listening. Assalamu alaikum.